This is P. Hicks. I recently did a sort of amateur film restoration for the animator Wes Archer, who created a classic bit of animation in 1985 called JAC and RAD Go. And this is a film that I had seen at different animation festivals and on Night Flight on cable TV and different places. And I loved it as a kid. And long story short, I recently got in touch with Wes, and he sent me down a copy of an original 16mm print of the film to scan and restore because he didn't have a high-quality copy himself. So I'm going to take you quickly through the basic process of getting the film into the computer and restoring it and getting it to look really good and sharp. So the first step in the process is scanning the film. So this is a Movie Stuff RetroScan Universal, which is a reasonably affordable film scanner. And here you see it going through the machine and into the computer. This is the capture software where we're capturing it frame by frame in TIFF format. And now we have to capture the audio separately, so this is a projector going into a special box which registers the frames, the shutter, and it synchronizes the audio to the shutter so that when you bring it into the computer, the audio is locked in sync with the 24 frames per second. And now we're going to quickly do some audio restoration. These are some thumpy sounds that are being produced by the projector that I want to get rid of, so...
Let's go!
Here I'm using Isotope RX software for the noise reduction, and then just sort of a general kind of broadband noise reduction here. The audio from this 16mm print is never going to sound great, but we can make some slight improvements to it.
Blowin', blowin', go, blow, go!
Okay, so now we're going to bring the TIFF sequence at 24 frames per second and the audio into Vegas Pro, which is the video editing software that I use. And we're going to do sort of a basic initial noise reduction on the film itself. There's the audio synchronized to the video. And the playback is a little choppy because those are uncompressed TIFFs. Alright, so for video noise reduction I use a plugin called Neat Video, and you take a sample of a neutral noisy area in the film, and I'm going to do some basic noise reduction and sharpening with Neat Video. You can also do dust removal, scratch removal, that sort of thing. You can see a scratch on the film right there. But as you'll see in a bit, see, I can remove that, but I decided not to, and I'll show you in a minute why I decided not to go with the dust and scratch removal. But the noise reduction and the sharpening, and I'm like cranking the sharpening up all the way to the max because that's what looked best in this case. These things work pretty well, and they make the film look a lot better than the raw scan. So now the dust and scratch removal, unfortunately, tends to have the effect of removing things that you don't want it to remove. Like here, it's taking out part of JAC Mac's arm. So instead of doing that, I'm going to remove that stuff manually by hand. So this is in Photoshop, and you load the frames in one by one or in small batches, and you just gotta put in the hours of locating all these little things that you don't want in there and taking them out. This film is about 4 minutes long, and it has a bit over 5,000 frames, so you do the math. Fortunately, I was able to clean the film pretty well and mostly eliminate the actual physical dust and things that were on it, but you still have a lot of these white marks, which are things that crept in the negative itself, which are permanently on the film. So if you want to get rid of them, you have to go in and do it this way. And it's a lot of little marks and things. I tried to preserve things that were part of the film itself, but not necessarily intended. You can see in some sequences some pencil lines and things on the film that maybe Wes didn't fully intend to be in the finished film, but they are a part of the artwork. And so I like to preserve stuff like that because it's part of the character of this sort of old school way of doing things. Since we have computers now, we can get everything perfect, and there's no flaws like this. But back in the day, you had all kinds of stuff like that. So I like to preserve some of it and eliminate some of it. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we need to steady the film, because when you scan it in, there's always a bit of, it's called gate weave, where the frames move around a bit more than you want them to. So what I do is I scan the film in with the sprocket holes fully visible, and then I can use those as a registration reference to steady the frames. And now Vegas doesn't have a great tool for this, so I'm using DaVinci Resolve, which has really good planar tracking tools. And so what you do is you draw a box around your sprocket holes, and then you can scan the entire film through, and it creates a tracking reference so that you can steady the sprocket holes so that they don't deviate from each other, and then hopefully that will make the frames generally stable. It's not 100% perfect, but it's a lot better than doing nothing, where your image is jumping around in the frame a lot. So now we're tracking the film, and you have to go through the entire film. I'm not doing that here. And then you put it into steady mode, and now you can see that the sprocket holes are locked pretty steady, and it's much more stable. And then from here you export another tip sequence out of here, and then re-import it back into Vegas. So there's the steadied frames. We'll go back into tracking mode to show the unsteadied frames. And then the steadied frames once again. Now we're going to do some color correcting, and I'm using Wes's VHS copy as a basic color reference here. I didn't try to match the colors slavishly, but I wanted to at least get the white balance right, which is what I'm doing here, comparing the VHS to the film, and then putting in some white balance. And I also wanted the colors to pop even more so than on the VHS. So I really kind of cranked up the saturation. There's the film, there's the VHS, film, VHS, film, VHS, film. And the next thing that needs to be done is we need to crop it, because you can see at the top of the frame there's a little L-shaped hair, and that is on the film itself. It's not a piece of dust. It's, you know, it's on the actual film, and it's in the entire middle of the film, and thousands of frames, and I really didn't want to manually remove every last one of those. So we decided the best thing to do, especially since the VHS copy is cropped, we decided to just crop it out. So here I'm just fine-tuning the cropping to get rid of that little hair. And now here's a comparison sequence of the VHS to the final result.
JAC, black and white!
And that's about it. So hope you enjoyed this little walkthrough, and go watch the finished film. It's a classic.